It started with a Tuesday morning phone call, the kind you almost let go to voicemail because you're rinsing a coffee mug or looking for your keys. "Ms. Layton?" the voice said, calm and professional. "This is a courtesy call regarding your mortgage payment. This is your third notice of delinquency." My heart stuttered. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "I think you have the wrong person." She read back my name, my full name, my social security number, my address. Her tone didn't change, but something shifted inside me, like the walls of my chest tightened. I felt like I'd just walked into a room where the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. "I don't have a mortgage," I said. "I rent. I've always rented." A pause. Then she gently suggested I check with my loan provider and gave me a number to call. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed in the same navy blue bathrobe I'd had since grad school, scrolling through my email. My inbox was filled with things I'd ignored: past due notices, bank alerts, credit monitoring warnings I thought were spam. I opened them one by one. My credit score had plummeted. Accounts I'd never opened were draining money in my name. And then I saw it. Loan Ledger 8745092. Principal, $300,000. Co-signer, Emily Layton. Primary, Jacob Layton. Jake, my brother. My hands shook as I reached for the ceramic mug on the nightstand. It slipped, shattering across the hardwood. I stared at the broken pieces, remembering how Mom used to say we were her matching set, like salt and pepper shakers, always meant to go together. That was before she passed. Before Dad rewrote the family narrative without me in it. I drove to Dad's house that afternoon. The old oak door was still painted in that fading forest green I'd helped him choose years ago. There was a new BMW in the driveway. Jake's, no doubt. Dad opened the door wearing a golf polo and that infuriating look of casual confidence he always wore when he knew something you didn't. "I need to talk," I said, stepping past him, without waiting for permission. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and entitlement. Framed photos lined the hallway. Jake shaking hands at a college graduation I paid for. Jake at Dad's company holiday party. None of me. None of Mom. I dropped the printed loan statement onto the glass dining table. "Why am I on this?" Didn't even flinch. "It's handled," he said, waving a hand. "You're overreacting. You used my name, my credit. It's family, Emily. You're always going on about how Jake needs a chance. I gave him one. With my future? It's just a signature." I laughed. Bitter. Broken. "Do you even hear yourself?" He looked at me like I was being dramatic. Like I was a child complaining about sharing a toy. And suddenly I saw it. How deep the rot went. How small I'd made myself just to be allowed at this table. A table where my name was good enough for paperwork, but not for place settings. That night, I pulled the box of old documents from my closet. Warranties, tax returns, student loan info. I stayed up cross-checking signatures, checking accounts. The more I looked, the more I saw the pattern. Jake had access to my info. Dad had, means I'd trusted them both. By 3 a.m., my apartment looked like a detective's war room. Papers spread across the floor, highlighters bleeding over dates and numbers. I clutched an old perfume bottle Mom had given me, its floral scent now faint, like memory. I held it to my chest and let the tears come. They didn't just steal my name. They made me a stranger in my own life. Jake was born with a crown on his head and gold in his pockets. Figuratively, of course. But that's how it felt. From the moment he arrived, the sun rose and set for him. I used to think that maybe I'd been born too quietly. I didn't cry in the hospital, according to my mother. I just blinked up at her, solemn, as if I already understood what it meant to be overlooked. Jake was loud, messy, magnetic. He crashed toy cars into walls and tore pages out of books. I read mine carefully, tucked away in corners, unnoticed. When he broke something, Dad laughed and bought another. When I cracked a mug, he sighed like it confirmed his worst fears. We were the same blood, but never equals. He got the bedroom with the view, the larger portions at dinner, the birthday parties with themes. I got praise for being low maintenance, which is just another way of saying easy to ignore. Mom tried to bridge the gap. She'd sneak me extra strawberries on my plate or write tiny notes in my lunchbox. You are enough. But when she died, so did that balance. And Dad? He tilted further toward Jake like a plant leaning toward the only light source. After college, I landed a quiet job at a nonprofit, doing operations and budgeting. Nothing glamorous, but stable. I lived small, studio apartment, secondhand furniture, always couponing. I never asked for help. I took pride in that. Jake dropped out halfway through his second semester. He said college was too structured. He wanted to start a record label, then a clothing brand, then a crypto venture. Dad called it entrepreneurial spirit. He failed, repeatedly. But somehow, there was always another launch, another lease, another second chance. And always, Dad was behind it, writing checks, making calls, cleaning. When Jake moved into Dad's second home, a 2-bedroom condo in the suburbs, I tried to laugh it off. Well, at least he's not living with you anymore, I said during one of our rare dinners. Dad didn't laugh. He just shrugged. He needs space, structure, it's temporary. A year later, I called Dad in a moment of vulnerability. I'd found a tiny condo, modest, but mine. I just needed a little help with the down payment. I rehearsed the conversation 10 times. I thought maybe he'd be proud I'd made it this far on my own. His answer was quick. You're doing fine, Emily. He needs it more. That sentence should have broken something inside me. Instead, I thanked him. That was the worst part. I was so used to being overlooked. I'd trained myself not to feel the sting. I paid the full down payment alone. Drained half my savings. But I moved in with a kind of quiet pride. I placed my mother's old photo frame on the nightstand first thing. Her smile in that picture always made me feel seen. The red flags were there. God, they were practically waving in a parade. Jake showed up at Christmas with a brand new watch. Rolex, he said. Limited edition. He didn't have a job. When I asked, he smirked. Dad believes in investing in potential. I started noticing other things. Dad grew cagey whenever I brought up the family accountant. He once changed the subject so abruptly, I forgot what I was even saying. My tax returns never matched the summaries I got. Jake had new clothes, new electronics, a lifestyle that didn't add up. But I let it go. Because that's what I'd always done. Because when your name is never spoken first, you start believing maybe you don't deserve to ask questions. One afternoon, I went to the storage unit Dad rented to keep some of Mom's old things. I was looking for her pressed flower scrapbook, the one she used to write poetry in. Instead, I found a dusty cardboard box with Jake's name scrawled in thick black marker. Curious, I opened it. Inside, envelopes, contracts, receipts, and then photocopies of documents with my name, Social Security forms, bank authorizations, a credit card application with my childhood address, and Jake's signature forged beneath mine. I stood there frozen, the scrapbook forgotten. My fingers trembled as I picked through each paper, heat rising to my face like a tidal wave. I thought I was just unwanted. I hadn't realized I was also useful. A tool. A ghost who could sign things and never be seen. Later that night, I sprayed the last few drops of my mother's perfume into the air. Soft gardenia and vanilla. I closed my eyes and let it wrap around me like armor. That scent was the only thing in my life that hadn't betrayed me. I looked in the mirror, eyes rimmed red, hair pulled back, pale lips pressed together. And for the first time, I asked the question out loud. What if being responsible was just the name they gave my silence? The letter arrived in a plain envelope. No logo, no warmth, just cold ink on beige paper. Final notice screamed across the top in red. My hands went numb as I read it. The words made no sense at first. A property I'd never seen, a mortgage I'd never signed, a foreclosure process already in motion. The worst part, my name was all over it. I called the number at the bottom of the page. I remember the hold music, some cheap, tinkling version of Canon in D that felt almost insulting. When someone finally picked up, she confirmed it. Yes, Emily Layton was listed as the co-signer. Yes, the payments had stopped months ago. Yes, the credit agencies had already been notified. My credit score was in freefall, and with it, everything I had worked for. I sat on the edge of my kitchen stool, the world tilting slightly. The fridge hummed. Outside, someone walked their dog. Life was going on, unaware that mine had cracked open in silence. The address was 3 hours away, tucked in a suburb I'd only heard of in passing. I don't even remember the drive. Just the growing ache in my stomach, like I was chasing a truth I already knew but couldn't yet accept. The house was beautiful. A modern 2-story with white siding and black trim. Expensive landscaping. Wide driveway, string lights twinkling along the porch railing like it was prepped for a magazine shoot. Jake's car was parked out front. The same car he said was sponsored by a friend. I should have known then. But it was the laughter that did it. That casual, beer-soaked kind of laughter that floated through the evening air and landed like shards in my chest. I walked around to the backyard. The patio was glowing from soft floodlights. Dad was flipping steaks on the grill, apron dusted with ash. Jake lounged in a cushioned chair, drink in hand, feet kicked up on the table like he owned the world. Stood there for what felt like forever. The foreclosure letter crumpled in my hand. None of them saw me. I knocked hard on the sliding glass door. Jake turned first. His face registered surprise, then immediate guilt. My father's smile flickered, but didn't vanish. "Emily," he said slowly, like I'd shown up early to a party I wasn't invited to. "What is this?" I held up the letter. My voice was low, but sharp. "Why is my name on this house?" Jake stood, smoothing his shirt like it was some kind of negotiation. "Look, I was going to tell you." "Tell me?" I laughed, brittle and wild. "You took out a mortgage in my name." Dad stepped in then, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder like he was shielding a toddler. "Calm down, Em. It's not what you think." "Oh, really? Because I think it's fraud." He frowned like I was being dramatic. "It's not like that. You weren't using the credit. Jake needed help. And it's all staying in the family." I stared at him. At both of them. I had no words for what I felt. It was betrayal, yes, but also something colder. Something final. "Do you even realize what you've done to me?" I whispered. Jake looked away. Dad shook his head, disappointed in me somehow. "You're always so ungrateful. We gave you stability. You're strong enough to bounce back." I turned and left without another word. I barely made it to my car. The inside felt like a coffin. Silent, airless. Too small for what I was feeling. Opened the glove box and pulled out a bottle of wine I'd bought earlier that week. It was meant to celebrate a promotion I thought I'd get. But that same morning, HR had called. "We're sorry. Your credit history makes you a liability for the role." They'd been kind, professional. But the subtext was clear. I was now untrustworthy, a risk, because of them. I took a sip straight from the bottle. It burned. My hands trembled. Then I got out and walked back to the yard. They were laughing again, louder this time, like I'd been a blip and nothing more. I stood just outside the pool of light from the patio, raised the glass bottle in a silent toast. Then I dropped it. The sound of shattering glass against stone cracked through the laughter like thunder. They froze. Jake stood. Dad turned, jaw set, but neither of them stepped forward. I looked at them one last time, their faces backlit by soft lights, flickering like ghosts behind a sheet of glass. And in that moment, I understood. I didn't belong there. Maybe I never had. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. I didn't clean the shattered mug from the night before. I just sat with it. I pulled out the small wooden box I kept tucked in my closet. Inside was my mother's old wedding ring, nestled in velvet. She used to say it reminded her who she was before the noise. I turned it over in my hand, the worn gold glinting in the low light. I whispered to the empty room, "I see it now." This wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure, and something in me, some quiet, unseen part, snapped back into place. I found the listing on a bulletin board outside a library. It was handwritten on pink paper, tucked between a babysitting ad and a lost parrot flyer. Studio for rent, above flower shop, cash preferred, quiet tenant only. It felt like a whisper from the universe. The building was brick and faded blue, tucked between a laundromat and an antique bookstore that only opened on weekends. I rang the bell beneath the Petal and Vine sign and waited. A moment later, a woman in her 60s opened the door, wiping her hands on an apron dusted with pollen. "You Emily?" she asked, like she already knew. I nodded. She handed me a key without asking for references. "It's yours. First month up front. Don't stomp." That was how I met Margaret. The apartment was barely a room. Slanted ceiling. One small window that overlooked the alley. The radiator coughed at night like it was dying. But it was mine. More than that. It was quiet. I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. That silence was a mercy. My first night. There, I placed the box of important things on the floor. Mom's ring, the foreclosure letter, a framed photo from my college graduation, the perfume bottle with its fading scent of gardenia. I didn't unpack for days. I just sat with it all. My grief, my shame, my numbness. I cried in the shower. I drank cheap tea and stared at the cracks in the ceiling. I listened to the hum of Margaret arranging blooms below me. Tulips, daffodils, peonies in season. Margaret never pried. She would just pass me a chipped teacup every few days with something floral steeping inside, or slide a book across the shop counter when I stopped by for breath. Once, she handed me scissors without a word, motioning to a bucket of limp tulips. I trimmed their stems under her gaze. She nodded once and went back to watering the orchids. I started working temp jobs, admin gigs, delivery shifts, even helped Margaret unload her early morning flower shipments. Nothing stable, but enough to keep me afloat. I deleted my social media, blocked Jake, blocked Dad. Every time I started to write them an email, I erased it. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't be swallowed by their silence. Healing, I learned, wasn't loud. It was not revenge montages or sudden transformations. It was mundane. A series of unremarkable mornings where I made it to noon without crying. I began journaling. Everything I could remember. Every document I'd seen. Every conversation. I drew lines between events like a detective mapping out a case. Because it was a case. They'd stolen my name, my credit, my peace of mind. At the library, I read obsessively. Consumer protection laws, power of attorney statutes, fraud, identity theft. I filed public records requests, contacted credit bureaus, ordered copies of every report I could. Each discovery added another spark to something I thought I'd lost: my sense of self. One gray morning, I returned from a grocery run to find Margaret sitting in the stairwell, a mug balanced on her knee and a book in her lap. She held it out without looking at me. "Poetry," she said. "Might help." I took it. The spine was cracked, pages worn soft at the edges. On the inside cover, in faint blue ink, was written, "You can grow something beautiful out of broken roots." It stopped me. That night, I lit a candle and read the poems one by one. They weren't pretty. They were jagged and strange, but they were honest. I found one line I copied into my journal. "Even the severed limb learns to sing when the wind is right." That was the night the idea came. Not revenge, not rage. Rebuilding. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted to reclaim myself. I started documenting everything like a paper trail detective. I created a spreadsheet of forged signatures, gathered pay stubs to show I hadn't benefited from the loans, compared timestamps on bank activity to prove I wasn't present. I even reached out to a paralegal I found in an online forum, someone who specialized in identity theft. We spoke in careful language. She told me I wasn't alone, that I wasn't foolish, that this wasn't my fault. I almost cried when she said that, but I didn't. Not yet. One day, while helping Margaret arrange condolence bouquets, she said without looking up, "You're steadier now." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She tied a ribbon around a vase. "Your hands. Less shaking. Your eyes have more fight." I didn't know how to respond, so I nodded. But later, as I walked up the stairs, I ran my fingers along the chipped rail. For the first time in months, I felt taller. That night, I lit the candle again. The flame flickered near the wedding ring. I didn't put it on. I wasn't ready. But I cleaned the band with a soft cloth, letting it shine in the light. It had belonged to a woman who'd survived more than I ever knew. And now, it belonged to someone who was finally remembering what it meant to be whole. It was a Tuesday morning when I slipped the pearl ring onto my finger for the first time. It had belonged to my mother. She always kept it tucked away in a velvet pouch, claiming it was too delicate for daily wear. After she died, I stored it at the back of my closet, like a relic from a life that felt too soft for the world I lived in. But that morning, something in me had shifted. The tea tasted stronger, my spine straighter. I saw my own reflection in the mirror, not washed out, not ghosted, but present. I slipped the ring on slowly, expecting to feel like an imposter. Instead, it fit like armor. Grace didn't have to mean silence. Resilience didn't have to look like forgiveness. By then, I had built an organized folder system on my laptop. 3 categories: fraud, legal, evidence. Every time I found another forged signature, I scanned it. Every account opened with my credit, screenshotted and cross-referenced. I mapped transactions on spreadsheets with timestamps and amounts. I learned how to match metadata. I created timelines, charts, flow diagrams. I wasn't just healing anymore, was building a case. I discovered Jake had taken out not 1, but 3 more loans in my name. One of them funded a warehouse inventory for his luxury streetwear brand, which had folded within 6 months. Another had gone into cryptocurrency. The last, I don't even know. Gambling, probably. The bank statements blurred into shame and arrogance. I remember the moment I found an invoice for a private jet service. My jaw clenched so hard I heard it pop. He'd flown to Vegas, while I rationed my groceries to make rent. The audacity was almost artistic. That night, I met with a lawyer named Harper. I'd found her through a legal aid clinic after weeks of research. She looked barely older than me, but spoke like she'd already buried 10 fraudsters in court. "You've got everything we need," she said, flipping through my binder. Her tone was flat, but impressed. "This is airtight." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. "What happens next?" I asked. She smiled, slow, deliberate. "Now we file, and while the courts do their thing, you get your hands dirty." With Harper's help, we filed for identity theft and fraud. We submitted affidavits, requested hearings. Jake would be served within the month, but I wasn't finished. One of the properties Jake had defaulted on, the same house I'd found him laughing in, was now in pre-foreclosure. I researched the lien holder, traced the bank, learned that I could buy it through an anonymous holding LLC. So I did. I pooled what I had left, drained the last of my savings, even sold off old jewelry I no longer cared about. I created a company with a neutral name, filed the paperwork, bid on the lien. 3 weeks later, it was mine. Jake had no idea. I started walking differently after that. Not with arrogance, but with precision. I moved through the flower shop like someone in control. My posture changed. My voice steadied. Margaret noticed. "You've got a storm brewing in you," she said once, handing me a fresh cup of tea. "But you're not afraid of it anymore." I looked down at the pearl ring, now smudged from use. "I'm learning how to use it." She gave a knowing nod. "Good. Some storms don't destroy. Some cleanse." It was strange, the power that came with knowing I didn't need to yell. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need to be seen anymore. I only needed to act. Every night, I would light the same candle near the old perfume bottle and wedding ring. They sat like totems, reminders of the women I came from and the woman I was becoming. I didn't want revenge. I wanted sovereignty, and I had it now, in legal documents and property records, in the sudden shift of leverage. I was no longer surviving the damage. I was owning the blueprint. On the day the lien transfer was finalized, I treated myself to a slice of lemon cake from the bakery down the street. It was too sweet, too yellow, and it made me smile. I walked past the flower shop and paused at the window, watching Margaret trim stems with the same careful hand she'd offered me months ago. I tapped on the glass. She looked up. "Thank you," I mouthed. She gave a slight smile and nodded. Then I turned and walked back upstairs, slow, deliberate, and whole. They didn't know I owned the house until the letter arrived in Jake's mailbox. It was an official notice, plain, brutal, legal. A foreclosure auction had been initiated, and the property would be seized. The listed lien holder? My company. I imagined the look on Jake's face when he saw it, how his smug confidence would crumble as he realized the walls around him weren't just falling, they were being pulled down by me. It was poetic in a way. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't screamed. I hadn't even raised my voice. But now, everything he thought belonged to him was slipping through fingers he'd never learned to use responsibly. On the day of the auction, I wore the same blazer I'd worn to my first job interview out of college. It had a small snag in the cuff, barely visible, but I kept it as a reminder of who I used to be. I pinned my hair back neatly, slid my mother's pearl ring onto my finger, and slipped a folded copy of the court documents into my bag like a dagger I didn't need to draw unless asked. When I arrived at the county office, the air was heavy with anticipation. A cluster of real estate agents loitered outside. A woman with a clipboard called names. My name, my real, full name, was on the paperwork. I stepped forward. Calm, steady, complete. Jake didn't show up until just before it began. He walked in like he still owned the room. Hair slicked back, designer sunglasses, that same swagger he'd always carried, like the world was his personal stage, until he saw me. He stopped in the doorway, eyes narrowing. "What the hell are you doing here?" I smiled, softly, almost kindly. "Just watching things settle where they belong." His jaw twitched. "You can't do this." I already did. Before he could say more, the clerk began. The property went to auction. No one else placed a bid. I didn't need to outbid anyone. I already held the lien. It was a formality, a signature, a seal, a shift in power. When the gavel dropped, it echoed like thunder through a hollow room. He stormed toward me after, shaking. "You think you've won?" "No," I said. "I think I've restored balance." Then I handed him an envelope. Inside were copies of the lawsuits, the affidavits, and the court summons. "You'll want to read those before you start any more businesses," I added. He didn't open it. He just glared like a cornered child who still hadn't realized the game was over. Court came weeks later. The room was pale and cold, all gray walls and muted carpeting, but the judge's voice carried weight. I sat beside Harper, my lawyer, fingers folded around a pen I never uncapped. Jake sat across from me, in a wrinkled suit, fidgeting like a boy who hadn't done his homework. My father sat beside him, still in denial, still believing he could talk his way through anything. But this time, no one could spin the truth. We presented our evidence: bank statements, forged documents, credit reports, witness testimonies, surveillance footage of Jake signing under my name, even metadata from PDFs that traced the document creation back to his laptop. Every piece landed like a stone on a scale, slowly tipping it until the weight of their lies became impossible to ignore. The judge looked at Jake like he was some poorly trained child caught stealing from the bake sale. And then he looked at me. "Ms. Layton," he said, "do you have anything you'd like to add before I rule?" I stood. My voice didn't shake. "You taught me to be silent," I said, my eyes locked on my father. "You taught me to make myself small, to sacrifice, to disappear so others could shine." I turned to Jake. "You taught me that love could be used like currency, that trust was something to exploit." Then I looked at the judge, not with anger, but with clarity. But I learned that silence is consent, and I'm done consenting to being stolen from. The courtroom didn't clap. This wasn't a movie. But there was a pause, a moment, a quiet that felt holy. The ruling came swift and final. Jake was held liable for all fraudulent loans, fines, restitution. My credit was ordered to be cleared and repaired. Dad's role in the misuse of my identity and co-signature access was formally noted. The business he had built under my name, literally registered using my personal credentials, was now legally mine. They'd been careless with the paperwork, lazy with their power, and now it belonged to the person they underestimated the most. That night, I returned to the flower shop. Margaret had left a bouquet outside my door, peonies and white tulips tied in a deep blue ribbon. No note. Just a silent gesture of pride. Inside, I lit my candle again, the one I hadn't touched in weeks. The old perfume bottle sat beside it, half full now. The wedding ring still rested in its velvet pouch, but the pearl ring stayed on my hand. I poured a glass of wine, not to drown pain, but to honor peace, and I sat in the quiet. A quiet I'd earned, a quiet that no longer felt lonely. I don't live for revenge. It's not about seeing them suffer. It's about me, sleeping soundly, walking taller, remembering who I am when no one's watching. When I type now, the pearl ring catches the light from my desk lamp. A tiny shimmer. A reminder that broken things can be more beautiful once rebuilt. that silence can be a weapon or a choice, and that I, Emily Layton, will never again be the name someone signs without consent.